Welcome to Days of Roar, the Detroit Tigers podcast, brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. My name is Mark Gorash. I am here with Detroit Lions fan and Detroit Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold. Ev, quite the day in Detroit sports lore. Where were you and where did you watch all this fun Detroit stuff today?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I watched the game at my in-laws, so got a chance to hang out with Savannah's parents, and we had a bunch of appetizers out there that we made and cooked up, and we ate a lot of food, and then obviously watched some really good football too. It's cool because I get to really live through other people, right? I get to live through my dad a little bit. He's been around a lot longer than I have been, and he's seen a lot more Lions losing seasons than I have, and same thing with Savannah's dad. So it's fun kind of watching them experience this as I'm experiencing it as well, knowing that like, hey, look, these guys have been through it. You know, I've experienced a little bit of that just watching Lions, throughout my lifetime, but, it's generations before me have been through the struggle and are now, reaping the rewards. So it's fun all the way around.
Well, it's not every day when you get to go to the NFC title game. Last time, 1991. I think this is a much better team than last time. Let's hope they fare a lot better than they did when they went to Washington. I'm not sure they allowed them on the plane after that game. But excited to see what happens next week. Think they got a great shot at going to the Super Bowl. I'm not even sure I've ever uttered those words in my 60-plus years of watching Lions football. We have Dan Kaplan to discuss the Bally Sports Amazon deal and explain to everybody how they're going to be able to watch games this summer. And then we have my baseball brothers coming on later from Tiger Minor League Report. We're going to go to Dan right now. I'd like to welcome Daniel Kaplan, sports business reporter, one of the best in the United States, 21 years at Sports Business Journal, a stint at The Athletic, currently writes for Awful Announcing in his own Substack. Had a busy week, Daniel, I'm sure, with the partnership between Diamond Sports and Amazon. How you doing today?
I'm good. I'm also going to the Super Bowl on behalf of Front Office Sports, so that's another thing I've got coming up.
Look, hopefully you'll see the Lions there.
Never know.
Well, maybe I'll see you there if that's the case.
Yeah, we'll see about that. So, hey, Daniel, Diamond Sports Group, which operates Bally Sports Detroit, home of the Detroit Tigers, Detroit Red Wings, and the Detroit Pistons on Bally Sports Detroit, along with other regional sports networks across the three leagues, has announced this partnership with Amazon. The partnership with Amazon investing $115 million will put local games on Prime Video and allow Diamond Sports Group to escape bankruptcy. What does all this mean, right? I mean, first and foremost, like how surprising was this announcement? What does it mean for local fans in this area and how they're going to be able to watch the Tigers, the Red Wings, and the Pistons moving forward?
Well, it was very surprising. To take the listeners back, Diamond declared bankruptcy in March of 2023. It was a victim of cord cutting. The number of subscribers it was able to get fees from through the cable system had dropped dramatically. And they had tried for years to get the streaming rights from Major League Baseball, and they had year-to-year deals with the NBA and NHL for those teams. But they finally hit a financial wall and declared bankruptcy. And as the bankruptcy moved along, it became quite apparent that that they were going to just try to exit bankruptcy with a one-year deal with NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball and close up shop after 2024. And so there was a court hearing last week that was coming up, and suddenly at the court hearing, Diamond pulled out a rabbit out of its hat. They had this Amazon deal. Amazon was investing money. The majority of the creditors were on board to reorganize. And I mean, as you mentioned, games will appear on Prime Video channels. So that was a complete U-turn of 180. And it was a big surprise.
So, essentially, if you are in the Bally Sports viewing area, pretty much for 2024, nothing's going to change. If you want to stream, this is something that's going to affect affect people that like to watch Tigers that are outside the Bally Sports Detroit market. So essentially, the Tigers are continuing their partnership with Bally Sports Detroit, which Diamond owned. They agreed to an extension back in 2021. Do we have any idea how much money the Tigers are going to receive for 2024 and how long the deal is going to be in effect?
Well, it will be in effect now as long as the terms say it will. I don't know the term of the deal that was agreed to in the extension in 2021. But whereas we thought all these deals were coming to an end at the close of the 2024 season, that apparently is no longer the case. Now, Major League Baseball, which has fought Diamond vociferously during this bankruptcy process, they've reserved judgment on this situation. They're not commenting. Their lawyer at the hearing in which this was announced and the Diamond people and the creditors were celebrating said it may not be time yet to celebrate. It's no secret that Major League Baseball has wanted to create its own local media portal, the local version of MLB.TV. And that's one of the reasons Diamond and Major League Baseball have been at loggerheads. We'll see what happens. We'll see if Major League Baseball gives up that dream and Bally's continues to be the regional sports channel of most of the teams here, of these 11 teams. It's still a bit of a mess.
So, Daniel, there's an existing deal, or at least in 2023 and prior, Bally Sports Detroit had streaming rights outside of their market for all the Tiger games. So I'm going to assume that those people that have watched the Tiger games streaming them are going to be able to find them on this new Amazon channel, and you'll be able to watch what you used to watch on your Bally Sports Detroit app on this new version of Amazon's channel for Major League Baseball, the 5 teams are going to have left.
That's correct. The 5 teams that have streaming deals with Bally Sports, and there's six of the ones that run on linear TV don't have streaming rights, but the Tigers are among those 5. It appears that they will transition to Amazon video channels, which is where you can choose to buy a channel, whether it's Max or Showtime or what have you. Among those channels will be now these regional sports networks that Amazon and Bally's have this agreement on. And one of those regional sports channels will be the Detroit one. And there you'll find your sports teams there. The pricing on that is not determined, but I would expect it would be somewhere in the range of $15, $20 a month.
For sure. Okay, so can you walk me through the overall situation in baseball right now? Because like you had said before, I thought MLB wanted to gain control of the streaming rights for every team in the league and kind of create this entire monopoly. But now it's all over the place. Like some teams don't have contracts. Some teams, like the Tigers, have their streaming rights wrapped up in Diamond. Other teams are a part of Diamond with TV rights, but they don't have the streaming rights wrapped up in Diamond. Other teams, like the Los Angeles Dodgers, Chicago Cubs, New York Yankees, have their own regional sports networks. So could MLB go into business with Amazon, or is there some beef between the two sides? Like, where are we kind of at as a whole right now? It seems like everything's all over the place. Where does this end up?
It's a poorly kept secret, if you can even call it that Diamond and Major League Baseball don't get along. The commissioner of baseball, Bob Manfred, has warred with the heads of Diamond Sports Group and their parent company, Sinclair. It's because they both want the same thing, which is streaming rights to Major League Baseball teams. Major League Baseball has created a local media business unit, and this was the unit that got behind the San Diego Padres and Arizona Diamondbacks when they were cast aside by Diamond Sports Group last summer with little notice. And that was the infrastructure in place to make sure those games stayed on the air. And it's that unit that wants more and more rights. So right now, some of your listeners may be familiar with MLB.TV. These are the out-of-market rights. What MLB wants to do is do the same thing, but for in-market rights, so that if you're in Detroit, you go to MLB.TV and you go to the local tab and you pick the team you want to watch. It's hard to see that being a reality if Bally's is staying in business and wants the streaming rights and has the Amazon platform, which would obviously be very convenient for many fans. But you're right. Even if you go be outside the Bally's universe of the 11 baseball teams, that's still 19, 20 teams that aren't in the streaming universe. So some have regional sports channels that they own. Some have other deals. Some right now don't have deals at all, like the Colorado Rockies.
So, I mean, Major League Baseball has been historically pretty savvy, from a business standpoint. I mean, you have MLB Network, You had the stuff that they sold to Disney before. They've been, pretty forward thinking historically. So I kind of think that they will have a game plan about how to deal with all of this. Plus, my question is now that they're transitioning to this, at least for the 2024 season, do we have any idea? People always complain about they're in a weird location. There's blackouts. There's weird blackouts. Have they discussed at all if blackouts are going to go away, if they're going to maintain themselves in an existing sense like they are from 2023? Have they addressed any of that?
Well, Major League Baseball, with its local media initiative, that was one of the issues they wanted to address, was to get rid of blackouts, which is a plague among out-of-market baseball fans. Right now, given the emergence of a legitimate Bally's option post-2024, I don't know if that issue gets solved right away, especially given the disharmony between baseball and Bally's. Does that change with Amazon's entrance? Because it's no secret that in sports teams and leagues want to be in business with Amazon. So does that change if they're interacting with Amazon rather than Bally's? That's a question. We'll see what happens. But in terms of local blackouts, if the teams had all gone to Major League Baseball, Major League Baseball could with one swoop get rid of blackouts. But now that doesn't seem to be where it's heading.
Okay, let me ask you one question there, and I'm going to pivot completely. I remember back in October of 2018, the Ilitch family, which owns the Tigers and the Red Wings, announced that it was exploring the creation of a new regional sports network. Here's an excerpt from the press release. Quote, "The extensive exploratory process will begin immediately, and no deadline has been set for completion," end quote. Now, that was more than 5 years ago. I'm curious, Dan, do you think creating a new RSN in the current climate of the RSN business would be a wise financial decision in this market, right? Trying to do something like what we've seen the Dodgers do, or the Cubs do, or the Yankees do. Could the Tigers maybe try to make that happen under Ilitch Holdings? Is that wise at this point, or are we in a spot where maybe that's not a good idea anymore?
Well, one of the problems with going out on your own, if you're a Major League Baseball team or a hockey team or an NBA team, is that you're paying yourself your own rights fee, right? The rights fees that Bally's and other original sports channels have paid have been the honey for these teams. It's what infuses them, allows them to go out and sign players and whatnot. The concern with Bally's going bankrupt was that they were not going to keep up the rights fees. They generally have kept up the rights fees. They are negotiating with a handful of the 11 teams to try to reduce what they pay in 2024. Ilitch probably made a wise decision not to form an RSN in 2018. Bally's bought their RSNs from Disney in 2019, which, by the way, Major League Baseball was the losing bidder there. So they've been fighting for these RSNs since 2019. And of course, cord cutting accelerated. It felt the macro economy of the cable system imploded. So if you're looking to form an RSN today, it would be tough. It would be tough because if the ecosystem continues to implode, there's just not enough subscribers to go around.
Because cable isn't going to subsidize it anymore like it used to. That's what you're saying. With the advent of streaming and the loss of cable viewers to streaming, the cable companies just can't afford to subsidize these channels and these teams the way they used to.
Yeah, it's a classic cable bundle. You have 100 channels, and there's a fee for each one of them, whether they're watched or not. And so sports has just ridden a wave off of that for the last 20, 30 years. That's about come to an end. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, the number of cable homes was about 100 million. It's now at about 70 million and still declining. We all know the stories of kids who are in their teens and 20s and never had a cable subscription. That's just growing and growing. So 15 years ago, when you started an RSN, you would have, say, 10 million subscribers in your system, and you got a fee from every one of them, whether those consumers watch the games or not. Now, if you go to streaming, they have to choose to buy your streaming subscription. That's a different ballgame. Now, you can put the games on over the air, and a number of teams are doing that, like the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Utah Jazz, and you will get a lot more viewers, and there's no doubt about that. but you don't get the same rights fee from that if you're the team. Trying to manage that downturn is going to be one of the dynamics to watch in professional sports over the next couple of years.
That's definitely interesting, and we're definitely going to be watching for it. Daniel, thanks for joining us and helping us digest the current state of the RSN business. We'd love to have you back on the podcast at some point in the future and dedicate a full show to the business side of sports. Can we try to maybe make that happen, steal you away a little bit more?
Yeah, that'd be great. And how do the Tigers look for this year?
They look like they could be better than the terrible last 7 years, and we're optimistic that maybe we'll see some good things this year.
Time will tell.
Well, you got the Lions.
Indeed we do.
Thank goodness.
Hey, all right. Hey, thanks for joining us. We look forward to having you on again.
Daniel, thanks for taking time.
Okay.
Daniel Kaplan, great job trying to sort out what's going on with Bally Sports Detroit and everybody's capacity to be able to watch Tiger games this year. We have two more guests, two of my baseball brothers, Rogelio Castillo and Chris Brown from Tiger Minor League Report. But before we discuss the minor leagues with them, when we come back, we're going to take a break first. I'd like to welcome two of my favorite baseball guys I go to baseball games with, two of my good buddies, Rogelio Castillo and Chris Brown from Tiger Minor League Report, a place where lots of people love to look at Tigers minor leaguers. They just came out with their top 30 list. They have a pod almost every week. My boys, what's up?
Hey, fellas. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This is awesome.
Not the first podcast we've done together, is it?
No, I think the goal is to keep this one under an hour.
I remember the first time I actually heard Mark on a podcast ever was on Chris Brown's old podcast way back in 2015. So,
boy, Bad Hop Radio.
Bad Hop Radio with your son, Jordan. So that's how I found out about Chris. So that's how long it goes back.
It's a long time ago. All right. So you guys came out with a top 30 list, and Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus have both come out with their lists of their top 100 or 101 in the last week. And the Tigers are extremely well represented. So you guys frequently go to West Michigan and Erie. I know you've also, Raj for sure has gotten a chance to go down to Lakeland. So you're two of the few guys that see these guys in person. So we thought it'd be a great time to have you on to discuss what your perspective is when you see these guys in person. You talk to the coaching staff. You've spoken to Ryan Garko. Let's start with your number one guy. That's Colt Keith. Good chance he's going to play second base. You've been watching him for a few years. Raj, why don't you kick it off and tell us what your thoughts are about Colt Keith?
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me was stood out to me early on, even before he was injured before he went on the injured list and then came back with a vengeance, was his ability to look for a good pitch early on. I mean, this was something that was when we saw him at West Michigan, his plate recognition already was showing, and he bulked up, then he tore himself back down, and he just thinks baseball all the time. He is ultimately a baseball rat. And some of the balls we saw him hit last year, I remember there was a series in Columbus where he went out and got the ball in the traffic, and we did a whole sound effect thing to it. And he was above average at every level he was at in terms of exit velocity at Erie, at Toledo. And I think the biggest, we've had him number one because of what he's done at his age. And we haven't seen a Tiger prospect, not even Riley Green, come out of high school with a vengeance like Colt Keith has. And so I think if you're looking at him, a lot of people still think he's going to be projected at third, but I think he's going to have a good shot of making his team on opening day. That's how he doesn't have he has nothing left to prove at Toledo whatsoever.
Chris, what's your thought?
I go back and forth between Colt Keith and Riley Green as the two best Tigers hitting prospects I've seen in the last few decades. It's kind of pick your poison there. I think Riley Green actually probably hits the ball slightly harder, more consistently, but Colt Keith strikes out less and is going to hit the ball in the air more often. And with both guys, you see this kind of advanced approach to the game where they will take that early count single to left field if it's going to drive in a run, or they'll work the count and get ahead and turn on something inside and try to launch. And it's just really impressive to see, as Raj said, Colt Keith just keeps hitting and hitting, and he keeps doing it at every level, and he'll have a little bit of a lull when he starts, and then he takes off. And he's, I imagine that big league pitching is going to eat him up a little bit in the first couple months of the season, but it would be kind of surprising to me if he's not one of the 5 best hitters on the team by September.
Hands down, no question about it. I agree with you, Chris. And just to chime in on this as well, like some inside info for you guys. Like I've talked to Colt Keith recently. Here's a teaser for an upcoming story. He says he's ready for his MLB debut. Probably no surprise, but look, when he told me that, I got the sense, look, this is a kid who says, I do not want to go back to AAA Toledo. I have no reason to be there. That's the way that he talks about being ready for his big league debut. I expect him to win the second base job. I give him a 95% chance of winning it. 1, he's really damn good. 2, he's confident and ready. And 3, there's the prospect promotion incentive, right? The Tigers can get a draft pick if he wins AL Rookie of the Year. One of the rules is that he's going to have to, get a full year of service time in the process of winning Rookie of the Year for the Tigers to get that draft pick. 1 year of service time. So basically that means he's either going to break camp with the team or be called up, before that 2-week period. At that point, just put him on the opening day roster, right? Like that's pretty obvious. And, you're going to want to get him as many at-bats as possible if you want to cash in for a draft pick. But yeah, look, the guy crushes everything. 90.4 mile per hour exit velocity. We talked about the approach, right? 10.4% walk rate, only a 21% strikeout rate. Got a great contact rate, makes contact in the zone as well. All around, there's no complaints about Colt Keith whatsoever. This is a guy who does damage, and he hits for average too. The only thing that I would say that I'm very interested to see is once he gets to the big league level, how does he handle changeups and splitters? Those are the 2 pitches that I kind of noticed through looking at the data and then just watching a little bit of the film that he struggled with. But I love the fact that he does not chase sliders. I'll be interested to see with the changeups, but I think he's pretty set at this point.
Yeah, and there's another pitch too. You make up a good point, Evan, that he struggles with sometimes but he adjusted to it early on. Was a lot of teams were trying to jam him up inside on fastballs, and then he would start it all of a sudden out of nowhere, just started elevating himself and making contact and crushing the ball. I mean, we've had him at number 1 since November of 2022. I mean, that's how adamant I was early on. Chris and I, like I said, it was just because his raw ability just to make those adjustments, and he did not struggle too much after they started elevating the fastball on him. And so I think he does win the job outright. I've never, again, just it's no offense to Riley Green or anything, but just the lack of strikeouts, but the pitch recognition skill set since day one has been there. And I've just put my flag out there really early about it, and I didn't care because that's how good to me he's been.
All right. Obviously the big question about Colt Keith is his defense. I know you guys have seen him play defense a few times. I'm not sure you got a chance to see him play second base. Did you see him play second base? He didn't play that much at Erie, but he did play some.
I saw him play a little bit of second base at Toledo, and Chris was one of the first to notice when he was playing third how his arm, because when he talked with us last year, he worked with Alan Trammell on his footwork in Arizona. He was trying to get back into the swing of things at third, but we noticed that the way he's kind of wasn't whipping the ball over the same way like he did before. And so I think that was wise of the Tigers to put him at second. He's serviceable. He makes some routine plays, and I think he might surprise you a little bit with his range. But honestly, I think his footwork and his ability to get the ball over the first base and present yourself as a solid second baseman, I think he's fine.
We actually caught him playing second base a little bit 2 years ago in West Michigan, and there you can go back and search some of our video if you want. And there's some fun plays of him going up the middle and doing the corner, that kind of 180 turn and throw to first base to get a guy out. Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's a Gold Glover or anything like that, but I think he'll be just fine. I think he's the type he's a gamer. And then, like Evan said, he's really confident. When we talked to him about third base, he was like, I want to be a Gold Glover. It's like, all right, well, cool. But so, yeah, I mean, I think he's going to bust his ass to be a serviceable big league second baseman, and I think he'll do it.
to remind everybody, if you ever want to see highlights about any of the players in the Tigers farm system that we're going to discuss, and probably quite a few we're not going to discuss, just go to Tigers Minor League Report on YouTube, and there's just more video on players than you could possibly have time to watch almost. So if you want to get a good look at all kinds of things, Colt Keith, good place to go do it. Let's talk a little bit about the number 2 player on your list, and some speculation that he'll spend some time in the major leagues this year. Really's come on, especially late in the year and in the fall. Jackson Jobe. I'm curious if you guys got to see any Jobe starts in person.
So Chris and I went for his first start back at West Michigan this year, and we had a holy you-know-what moment when we both were looking at what he was able to do right away. And there was even when this was against the Fort Wayne Tin Caps, the contact he did allow was just stuff that guys were able to turn on relatively quickly. But Jobe, after that, it was just a different night and day. He wasn't nibbling, he was attacking. And then just seeing the spin rate, we had pictures of the spin rate from our gun going, it was just 3,000, and just, but with consistency. And then he was able to do things with his fastball shape, looked a lot different than it did the previous year. He wasn't just, it just seemed like he had a better plan of attack. And that carried all the way till we watched his first start in Erie, and against a really good Richmond team, no less. He went out there, and we thought that maybe perhaps he would be on the postseason roster for the Seawolves because he was that good. I mean, he looked like a natural out there. And I think that the biggest difference is what he's been able to do with his pitch shape wise, and his command. His command is night and day compared to what we saw the year before.
He added a change too that's really changed the entire focus of his arsenal. So it's an exciting thing to see. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's upper echelon big league stuff. This is like the pure stuff is like Zach Wheeler, Garrett Cole, like holy crap stuff. He added the cutter, like you said, that gives him a fourth distinct pitch in terms of velocity and movement. And the changeup, we saw flashes of the changeup in 22, and the changeup just jumped up at least one grade last year. It was an outstanding pitch for him down the stretch. He's got the crazy slider. The fastball's 96 to 98. It's just crazy stuff. You just got to get him to the big leagues and get him healthy. That's the big question mark for me is he threw a total of 80 innings last year between the minors and the AFL, 20 starts. I can't imagine they're going to bring him more than 120 this year. So how are you going to figure that out? You're going to give him 30 in Erie, 30 in Toledo, 60 in Detroit? Would that be best for the Tigers to have him go through his growing pains if they're trying to make a run for the division? I don't know. But I think that they're probably going to want him in the opening day rotation in 2025. So that might be the goal this year, is to figure out how to get him ready for that.
I completely agree with you, Chris, on that, right? 2025 has got to be the target date. And if he gets up sooner, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Who really knows how that's all going to play out? The Tigers also, they might not need him. They do have a surplus of starting pitchers. If you look up and down their list, we're going to talk about some of them in a little bit, I'm sure. But like, there's so many guys that can pitch. They went out and they got a Jack Flaherty, and they went out and they got a Kenta Maeda. They have Casey Mize coming back. We'll see how all that stuff holds up. But I think for now, I'm excited to see how he develops with more time in Erie, and then hopefully getting that bump to Toledo as well. But, and Chris, you mentioned it, the fastball, and Raj too, right? The fastball shape is way different. In 2022, this guy was throwing the fastball at like 94, 95 with like 16, 17 inches of vert. And then obviously the end zone whiff rate was about 17%. Now he's sitting, 97 with, around 18 inches of vert. And then, the end zone whiff rate has gone way up. It's gone up from, 17% to now about 26%. That's an insane difference for a guy to be able to miss some bats in the zone. And sure, command plays a part in that. So yeah, sure, maybe I'm a little bit worried about the fastball getting hit in the zone at the highest level once he gets up to the big leagues. But if he can throw that cutter in the zone and he figures out the right, mix for how often to use that pitch, and then he's able to tunnel it with the changeup down, like I do think that there are a lot of things that are going to get hitters off the fastball and allow the fastball to be a little bit more successful. But that jump that the fastball took, I think, is pretty impressive.
And that's, we hope, to me, it's just similar to what we see with Ty Madden, which we'll get to too. He, against lefties, night and day difference from last year. And that's because of able to use that fastball break. Because I thought that last year guys were able to still pull their hands in and hit him pretty hard on the left side, but night and day difference.
All right. Well, that's two pretty exciting young players that both could make a huge impact to the team this year. Don't know how much you guys got a chance to see Clark or McGonigal this year. Obviously, most of their playing time came, in the GCL in Lakeland in 107-degree heat. But, obviously 2 other guys that are pretty exciting that are on your list. I did notice that you guys, different than a lot of lists, had Parker Meadows number 5, and I did some checking today just to remind myself, but I think Parker Meadows still maintained his rookie status. Another player that has the possibility of being a rookie of the year. We don't really think about it that way, but you guys got to see a lot of Parker Meadows over the last 4 years. I'm curious about your thoughts about him.
I think Parker Meadows might be one of the better defensive outfielders in all of the Tigers organization because he's like a gazelle out there. I mean, when he left West Michigan to go to Erie last year, there was a significant difference drop off in the defense. And when it's the same thing, he covers so much ground. He's so fast, but working with his coach the offseason, picking up where his foot, just doing the little footwork thing, able to generate versus when we first saw him in 2019. He was on our first interviews, and when Chris asked him about bunting to get on, it's a different player altogether. And he is put together in just terms of just extra base power and quickness on the base pass, but also pitch recognition too. Something that was kind of not really talked about. And I think it was Jerry or Chris that talked about how towards the end of September, again, I know September numbers are always kind of misleading a little bit, but he was able to not swing at some of the bad pitches he struggled with before. So his batting eye got better. And I think for the Tigers, they have the luxury of keeping Riley Green in left or just kind of off his field a little bit because you want Riley Green healthy, obviously. And I think with Parker Meadows in center field, that allows you to have that luxury because he covers so much ground.
Yeah, I think I may be higher on Parker Meadows than just about anybody, which is odd because, we were there right into those first 2-3 years when it was a huge struggle. But his floor is just so high. That's what has me, I think I had him 4th in my top 10. If he goes out and plays defense the way he did last year, it hits 230. He's like a 2-3 WAR player just on that. And if he adds 15 bombs and 20 steals, then you got something. And I think he might hit better than 230. I think the one interesting thing about him is that he just doesn't swing. He doesn't swing as much. He's not swinging and missing much. He swung and missed less than Colt Keith in the minors last year, less than Jace Young. He just doesn't swing as much. And now, maybe he's not reading the pitches as well, or maybe he knows his swing and knows that he can't get to these other pitches. But I would like to see him swing more. Just swing a little bit more because he's got juice in the bat. And, he's fast enough that he can leg out plenty of ground balls in the infield or, turn a single into a double. So, I'm excited to see what he can do this year. We'll see. I know there's not a universal belief in his hit tool, but I think he can get close to average offensively. And with that defense, he's going to be very valuable for them.
All right. Lastly, in the top 5, you got Jace Young. You guys have seen him probably more than anyone. You saw him quite a bit at West Michigan. You saw him go from having an okay sporadic year to catching fire the last, say, 65 games between there and getting promoted to Erie. Tell us what you saw, what you thought of the glove, thought of the arm, and thought of the bat.
Well, let me start with the glove because I know he prides himself on having a really good glove, and he obviously won Midwestern Player of the Year award at second base. And the glove, to me, has gotten it's a solid glove. I don't know where this scouting report we're seeing that he's got the stone hands or the range, but we see him make some really good plays. It's going back to when he first started at West Michigan. But I think the biggest thing that I saw last year when he got to Erie was his ability to, at the plate, be more disciplined at the plate and just hit the ball with just not only line drive power, of course, but not only just fly, getting that fly ball rate up, but really just pounding the ball hard. Just line drives, exit velocity was always up in the upper 90s into 100. We got some access from some of the data in Erie, and I really think that he could make the transition to third. I think he has a range for it. I don't see he's adequate I understand why people might be apprehensive, but based off his footwork a little bit, I think sometimes even when he gets out of the box a little bit, he could go a little quicker. But to me, what he did in Erie coming up there, and he had better than he did at West Michigan. And his splits were just outstanding. And I think that Tiger fans should be excited for a guy like Jay Young that can really, I think, be a difference maker in the lineup. Because I was kind of skeptical, but then last year I felt that he made a step forward. And even when teams try to adjust to him, where he was starting to make adjustments too, where teams before were going slider away and he was kind of swinging. But then he fixed it up and started hitting mistakes constantly. And that was something that I noticed in the last month of the season and really helped Erie win the championship last year.
Yeah, for me, Young is kind of another. He's one of those prospects for me that it was a really bad first impression for me and second impression, honestly. We went and saw him in 22 after the draft, and he wasn't hitting the ball hard. It was a lot of lazy fly balls to left field. And then the first couple months of last year, I was down there and watching him getting beat in the zone with like 93 mile an hour fastballs. Nothing special, but then he adjusted, and a couple months later, he's pulling 97 out of the park. So I was really impressed with that final stretch. And he seems to have mastered that kind of pull-heavy, fly-ball-heavy approach that we see occasionally in the major leagues. And I did some research a while back, and there are only 4 or 5 players in the big leagues who hit the ball in the air to the pull field as much as him. And it was Isaac Paredes, Kyle Schwarber, Max Muncy, and Cal Raleigh, I think. And those all got, they averaged like 32 home runs last year. So I think the power is going to translate to the big leagues, given his approach. I'm still not totally sold on the bat to ball skills, and I don't know what to make of the transition to third base. I mean, it was all of like 5 games in the AFL. He does have really good hands. He's not going to make a lot of fumbles or anything like that. I think the arm is kind of average. There was the coach out in the AFL was talking about how strong his arm was, that he could be a pitcher or something like that. But I don't know if he's just trying to get promoted or something. But I've never seen it look that strong, but maybe, I don't know. I was watching him throw for second base, so maybe I didn't really see him air it out. But yeah, I mean, he's a little bit lower for me. Like I said, I had him 5th in the system behind Meadows, just because I think Meadows offers the higher floor. I don't know if Young doesn't hit, I'm not really sure what he is.
That's beautiful. I completely agree with you on that. And I love your guys' insight on this too, because even combing through the data, and I like to compare every player with Colt Keith because I think Colt Keith is great. But when you look at, the contact rate from Jace Young and the in zone contact rate, just not as good, not all there yet, in my opinion, offensively. But to hear you guys say what you're saying about, the transition to Erie and some of the improvements that he made, I think that's really impressive and good to know. I also got a chance to see him in the fall league. So I did get to see him play, third base for a few games. And again, it's a few games, but I wasn't completely blown away with this guy at third base. I do think the arm is probably average. As you said, Chris, I'm not really sure about the range. And also the fact that the Tigers moved Jace Young to third base because Colt Keith is their second baseman. I think that tells you everything you need to know about the player in general, to be honest, and where they probably see both of those players. And sure, timeline plays into that, no doubt. But again, Colt Keith's going to play second base. He's going to be their second baseman, right? If Jace Young's going to make it to Detroit, he's going to make it as a third baseman, regardless of where the defense is at. And that's a problem I think the Tigers have up and down the board, is I think they have a ton of first basemen and DHs. That's what they have. If you look around their lineup, there's a ton of guys that seem like they'd be great for corner outfield, pray the ball doesn't get hit to them, DH or first base. And I think Jace Young kind of falls into that category a little bit if he's not playing second base. That's where I'm at with him. But that's just my opinion and kind of where I'm at. I can totally be proven wrong, and I hope he proves me wrong.
And, Evan, I mean, you bring up a good point, because you have Bigby and Malloy who are in the same profile. So the Tigers have actually somewhat of a good problem, depending on how you want to look at it, of those kind of players, because other teams could use that if they wanted to, per se, trade or what have you. But that, the emergence of Bigby too is based off some of the batted ball data too. Again, there's so many first base, DH, right fielder types you can carry though. So,
all right, let's discuss a few players that are beyond the top 5. Obviously, one is a huge favorite of my partner, Evan Petzold, which is Justin Henry Malloy. I also want to touch on a couple pitching prospects, Kiter Montero, Sawyer Gibson-Long, Wilmer Flores, and Madden. All 4 of those guys seem to be knocking on the door. And typically teams use 30 pitchers a season. Those 4 guys have a very good chance, along, I think, with Tyler Madison, of seeing time in the big leagues this year. So tell us what you know about, some of the pitchers plus Jahan. And, I'd be interested in your perspective about Jahan. You've seen him about as much as anybody.
So it was interesting when Scott Harris said that back in August that you would see Malloy more often get some time playing in the outfield, and he ended up playing a lot more third towards the end of the season, which kind of was, it was always interesting to me. I think we saw a grade where his arm is 55, but then we've seen it firsthand where it kind of reminded me of how Christian Stewart was in the outfield. The arm just doesn't seem to have the same range. And again, he's adequate at third, but he does a really good job of pitch recognition, which is something, and the bat to ball skills I think are great. However, I worry about his defense because if you put him out in left field, it could be serviceable, but it's just the arm range again. It's one of those things where I've seen it a couple of times in Toledo where he can sometimes look like he barely hit the cutoff man. So I don't know what the Tigers have planned in mind for him. As far as the arms go, Sawyer Gipson-Long was, to me, one of the biggest. The fact his K per 9 went up from just under 8 to 10 in just over a year. And he basically took a couple starts off. And when he talked to us about what he was able to do and work on his pitches and what the Tigers had planned from the beginning of the year, the state of the evolution of a guy who was really, to be honest, kind of an afterthought after the Michael Fulmer trade, go out there and command the way he did. We saw his second to last start in Toledo where he struck out 12 and he had 1 hit against Omaha. It was a flare, just a weak flare to left. The ability to go in there, to use his fastball is 92, 93. He's not going to overwhelm you with it, but the fact that he can command with his cutter and a change, there's a theme going on with the change, by the way, among all these pitchers too. And even Brant Hurler, I know we haven't mentioned him, but the Tigers were able to say, hey, this is how we want you to throw a change. We want you to know the pitch with that. And Long ran with it. And he really evolved that pitch. As far as Montero goes, I'm rooting for him because the Tigers have not, we know with like Fernando Rodney, they've had the reliever luck in terms of international pitchers, but they haven't had an international starting pitcher of note since, we're talking, we're not talking, maybe Felipe Lira. I don't know. It's been a long time since the Tigers had a starter. They've developed international. I'm sorry, I was Jar Jurgens, but in terms of the Latin American market, they just haven't had that success. And Montero, talking to him and talking to what Garco was saying about, they just went and basically translated everything into Spanish, and he just adapted like that. And his stuff is really good. His slider's really good. I hope he sticks around as a starter. I think he has the ability to do so. I think he has enough stuff there, but it depends really how the Tigers see him. But I see him as a starter, a guy that gets like a 4th or 5th starter type. And I could see him getting a call up at some point. It depends on how Detroit wants to use him. But yeah, I'm really high on Montero.
I also would like to see Montero stay as a starter, but he intrigues me as a relief option because his stuff, pure stuff, is not that far behind Jackson Jobs. His slider is like 2,800 RPMs. He's got a knuckle curve or a curve that's about 3,000. His changeup isn't as good, but the fastball is pretty darn good. And the main issue I saw with him is he just leaves the ball over the heart of the plate a little bit too much. And that includes, sometimes those big sweeping sliders are just hard to locate. And I think he's at the point right now where he's just kind of throwing it for strikes as best he can rather than locating it. But yeah, if you could just unleash him for an inning or two, he might be throwing 100 with a pretty nasty hook. But it is nice to keep as many guys starting as possible, right? As you said, Mark, you need a few dozen every year. And he would be one of the first candidates, I would think, to come up. Gipson-Long, we think is probably going to get pushed out given the signings that they've made. And then, they added Flores to the 40-man and Montero. So those guys you would think would get a crack. But it's solid depth to have in the upper minors, all these arms. And, given the amount of leaps we saw last year from Gibson Long and Montero and other guys, it wouldn't shock me if Madden or Flores, take a turn and are pushing their way into the big leagues before long.
Well, Madden's someone I want to ask both of you guys about, because I know you guys have seen him more than I have. But real quick on Justin Henry Malloy. Look, yeah, the defense is bad. I like the approach, but the strikeouts concern me. Again, little inside info. George Lombard actually went to Miami, and he met up with Andy Ibanez, Akil Baddoo, and Justin Henry Malloy. They all worked on defense. Ibanez being a part of that group, that was actually pretty interesting to me. I'm excited to get down to spring training and ask about that. But you know what? Maybe George Lombard can sprinkle some magic on him, and he can become a good outfielder. Who knows? But Ty Madden, tell me about him. Where are you guys at? Is this guy going to be a legit dude for the Tigers, you think?
I got a chance to see him in the postseason for Erie over the and I watched his starts extensively from late August till the end of the season, and something clicked with Madden. I know that he was very inconsistent early on in the season, and then in July he had an ERA of 0.92, came back in August. He had like one bad start. We got hit up a little bit, but then after that, he was money. And his biggest struggle was throwing against lefties. And he started executing that very well. And as long as he continues to, the biggest problem with him too was his fastball, because as Chris pointed out, we talked about this on the podcast, out of college, a lot of teams pass on him because of his fastball, but now he's utilized that better as a weapon. And I remember the first start we saw him this year, or the first start he up against Gavin Williams, who ended up going to Cleveland, and he was dominant. We're like, wow, this is a new Ty Madden. But the issue was still there until the middle of the season. And I think, especially against teams like Richmond and Binghamton, when the big game calls, that kind of like, I don't want to use that cliche, but he really put it in another gear this year. He was a lot more efficient too. He didn't have these long outings where he had these long innings where he was kind of just wanted to finish him with a certain pitch and couldn't do it. This year, he was a lot more efficient with his ability, with his command. I think Madden took a big step forward last year from being a guy who at one point we even admitted that we would consider them reliever to a potential starter. And I think it really bodes well. I think Toledo, with him and Flores, and hopefully it depends on what they want to do with Englert, probably have one of the better starting rotations that the Mudhens have had in a long time.
Yeah, it's hard not to like his arm as a guy who, he can sit in the mid-90s, get to the upper 90s. He's got all the pitches. He's got a starter's build. But he rides the nail on the head. The struggles against lefties have been his main issue. I think his OPS against lefties is close to 300 points higher than righties. He's got a cutter. He's got a changeup. He's got a slider that'll flash above average at times. It's just a matter of finding something that he can consistently use to attack lefties. And I don't know. The one thing that concerns me about last year is that walk rate crept up a little bit. It was, he got plenty of strikeouts, but the walk rate crept up over 10%, which is borderline reliever territory, generally speaking. And again, like he's got the build and arsenal of the starter, but he's another guy that I'd be intrigued. Would he be like a Kyle Funkhauser level reliever? Could he be something more than that? Funkhauser had that great sinker, and that's not really what Madden's known for. But I mean, I don't mean to like throw all these guys in the bullpen immediately. I'm just saying I think it could be a legitimate fallback option for him.
It's funny you mentioned Kyle Funkhauser, because I actually looked him up this week, and he's still a minor league free agent after his surgery. He did not re-sign with Texas. So I'd be curious if the Tigers would consider re-signing him and letting him throw at Toledo. He had a shocking degree of success when he was healthy for that year and a half. So might not be a terrible spec for them. All right, let's talk about Brant Hurter, kind of an under the radar prospect. Doesn't have stuff that wows you. Throws 90, 91. Has a great slider. Looks kind of like Erod's cutter, and a really good change that he mixes off that slider. Was probably their most dominant pitcher in the playoffs for Erie. You guys have seen him a lot more than we have. What can you tell us about him?
Well, he led all minor leagues in FIP and last year. And so I feel the independent pitching stat that people sometimes overglance. But I know, Mark, you and I discussed his fastball command, fastball shape a little bit. And I see where he does kind of tend to overthrow. But I think Hurter did a really good job last year as far as executing, going back. When he got a chance to talk to him, another guy, I mentioned this earlier, that the Tigers were working with on another pitch just to get him another way to just not just be so fastball slider reliant, or change up slider reliant with the occasional fastball. I think he's got some good deception. He's got a good extension on him too. But what pauses me is what you and I dissected in a DM about if he's going to be able to be consistent with his command, because also his walk rate kind of crept up last year. He was really good in the playoffs and was able to be clutch down the stretch, and even when they were watching his innings a little bit. But I really need to see it again at Toledo. If he starts the season at Toledo, can he get that walk rate down just a little bit because with the way lefties are these days, is he a guy who could be like a Tyler Alexander type? I don't think so, because his stuff seems like it's more like starter, but he really has to get that walk rate down in order to adjust. If you could get that adjusted, I think he'll be a difference maker at the next level.
Chrissy, you saw him a few times. What'd you think?
Yeah, I liked him back when we saw him in West Michigan a couple of years ago. He's just a hoss. He looks like an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Every bit of 6'6", 250. And it's a funky delivery. Like he like cuts himself off, and it comes from way on the left side. He's absolutely murder on left-handed hitters. They OPS under 500 last year, no home runs. So he's got that to fall back on. He could be a lefty reliever. I think there's enough command there. He does a pretty good job of spotting the fastball to inside and outside to righties. And as you said, the changeup is a solid pitch, and that slider looks above average. I lean reliever just because it's kind of a funky look, and you don't see starters like this in the big leagues really. But again, another solid depth arm to have. You keep him out there starting every fifth, sixth day, and maybe he takes a leap forward. And if not, you've got a strong lefty to fall back on. I do kind of think that there could be a fifth starter swingman role there for him, kind of like Tyler Alexander, I suppose. I don't know if he has. Alexander threw like 12 pitches. I think Herder's basically 3 or 4 right now, but maybe he can develop a couple more.
All right, I want to talk about two guys that were kind of disappointing last year that the Tigers spent a lot of money on. Christian Santana and Roberto Campos. I think you guys have seen as much of those two guys as anybody. And I know you talked to Ryan Garko on your pod about both of them. And I'm curious if you can share with Evan and I what you've learned, what you've seen, and what you're thinking.
So it was funny. We were out at West Michigan. We saw Tony Paul from Detroit News, and he said, we were talking about Campos. He's like, I heard he's kind of a butcher out there in the outfield. And we were like, no, he's fine. And within a half hour after we said that statement, he made some of the most brutal plays I've seen out there in a while in right field. I think Campos, I think the Brady Allen trade really helped West Michigan, but I digress. I think Campos struggled defensively last year in the outfield, and I don't know if long term if he's able to handle that position, because it's just he makes some really bad reads on the ball. He's got a good arm, he's got good speed, but the way he sees the ball and it comes across on the ball on the outfield is just I'm not trying to diss the guy so much, but it's brutal. It's brutal. I'm sorry, it is. It is absolute brutal when you see a guy coming in and then going all the way back. He got burned a couple times last year, and it was just cringeworthy. And as far as Christian Santana goes, I think it's a mental thing with him, because you see the bad ball data and you go, oh, all right, well, there's something there. But the problem is that strikeouts are way too high. And I think he's overthinking it a little bit, but you get encouraged by the walk rate. But again, that's also the level he's at. I'm not concerned about, great, good for you. You're walking at a high rate at single A. It's more or less like, hey, it's mental. It's all mental. And I really think it's one of those things where it's a mental thing with him. And I think that Santana defensively is all right, but until he figures it out at the play, I think I don't know. Maybe he expected to be at West Michigan last year. Well, I had a chance to talk to him in Lakeland last year, and he was really heading into the season very confident about its abilities. And so, yeah, I'm not sure what happened with him there.
Okay, Chris, I need you to tell me, right? So Roberto Campos is another DH, if I'm not mistaken. Is a guy ever going to hit bombs, though? Like, is he going to be able to be a 20-plus homer dude, or is that not happening? Because, look, I think people can live with bad defense and maybe a DH or a poor corner outfielder, as I mentioned, the Tigers seemingly have a surplus of, if they hit jacks and they go yard. Is Campos going to do that for us or no?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? The $3 million question. I don't know. However, he got. Yeah, I mean, he's 20. I'll give him time on the defense. He maybe look at him to pass the ball. He hits the ball really hard. He always has. And I think by the end of May last year, we had bumped him all the way up. We updated our rankings last year, and he was having a great start. And we bumped him up really high. And then I think they stopped throwing him fastballs. And he's one of those guys who can make contact with just about anything, even if he shouldn't. And so I think he really kind of got in his own head, and then the swings and misses started coming up. The curveballs and the changeups were getting him. But you see him on the right day, and I bring this story up multiple times. Jacob Misiorowski, who's probably the hardest throwing pitcher in the minor leagues, if not one of the top 3 or 4, was pitching against the Whitecaps, and Campos got ahead of him 2-0, and he took a 97, maybe 99 mile an hour fastball from Misiorowski and laced it over the third baseman's head. That was their first hit of the game. Nobody could touch him. And Campos, he can square up a bullet. But if you put a wrinkle on it, I don't know. It's tough. And so he's got to get – I mean, both of these guys are swing plane guys. That's what Garco said. He's got to get – Santana's got to get his swing plane down, and Campos needs to get his up. And I'm not smart enough to know how you do that. When we talked to Garco, he said that Kenny Graham got Justice Bigbie to do that a little bit. And Campos's batted ball profile is not that different from Justice Bigbie. It's kind of the similar amount of hard round balls, just not quite as much to the opposite field. But so I think there's a chance, but yeah, I wouldn't put money on it. I'll say that.
No, that's good to know. That's really good info, actually. Last player we're going to ask you about is Dylan Dingler, because that's a guy who just got added to the 40-man roster. Obviously, the Tigers now have 3 catchers on the 40-man. Donnie Sands has bounced off. Dylan Dingler's on. He's kind of that next catcher that's looking to break through. I have one interesting data point that I want to mention, but I really want to get you guys' take. So he was extremely passive early in counts last season, swinging at just 52.8% of pitches inside the strike zone with fewer than 2 strikes. So he's literally just not swinging until he gets to 2 strikes, which seemed to be a problem. And when I talked to him, he talked about kind of trying to implement more of a selective, aggressive approach, understanding what pitches he does damage on. And I love the quote. I have to read it. It's, quote, "It's like when you see Mike Trout swinging. There are hardly any times where you see him give a half swing at a ball he doesn't want to swing at. He waits for it to get into his zone, and then he takes a swing. Colt Keith is the same way. It's a very repeatable swing, and he does a lot of damage because he gets his swing off on pitches that he wants to swing at," end quote. So obviously Dingler there is comparing Mike Trout and Colt Keith, but he's also talking about the fact that he wants to be more selective, aggressive. Nobody wants to hunt and then go hunt it. Is that all that he needs to do on offense at this point to really break through and give you guys confidence that he's going to be good at the highest level? Or is there maybe more to it than that? And then also, what do you think about him defensively?
Just looking at the batted ball data down in Toledo, I mean, he was hitting, the hard hit rate was about 47%, which is above the league average of 36 down in AAA. And I think when he does get a hold of one, he really does. And I personally think that if he can get that selectiveness and avoid swinging those sliders away, like the biggest thing teams were just doing was just throwing just nasty stuff away, and he just couldn't resist. If he becomes more selective, I think he's such a good athlete, and it's such a really, to me at least, even shows really good speed for his catcher. I think once he gets that down, I really think he could be a difference maker, because defensively, he's one of the back pick master. I kid you not, every time we saw him live, we see him at least do 1 or 2 back picks. Right, Chris? I mean, it was pretty much on a regular basis.
Yeah, certainly attempt.
Yeah, and the pop times there too. And the difference between the biggest thing, Evan, that I could tell you that how much of a difference maker was defensively, when he came back to Erie and then Josh Crouch got sent back down to West Michigan. At that time, Erie had one of the worst ERAs in the Eastern League. And when he came back up, it was a 9-day difference. And Gabe Alvarez speaks highly of him being an effective leader, but it was the pitchers were basically trusting him. And it was an instant change, and Erie started winning. And there's no knock on Josh Crouch or anything, but that's how much I think Dingler can make a difference in pitching staff. There was a lot of new pitchers in Erie last year, and there's a lot of veterans, and he was able to just go in there in the locker room and instantly change it as soon as he was healthy.
Yeah, the physical tools with Dingler are great. They've always been great. I think he's excels at everything on defense, with the exception of maybe blocking balls is maybe average. And yeah, you talked about when he hits the ball, he hits it hard. The power's there. We've seen him kind of struggle at Erie for multiple years now, and it's interesting reading that article you wrote, Evan, because it was kind of him putting into words. We don't have the data, but we would watch him and go, it just seems like he's caught in between. Like he'll take a breaking ball right down the middle because he was looking for a fastball, and then swing right through a fastball because he was looking for a breaking ball. It always felt like he was just not quite there. And so, I mean, we've seen a couple games of him, go 0 for 3 with 3 strikeouts, 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts. And it's to the point where I'm not entirely sure that the hitting ability is ever going to get there. I think right now he's kind of a Jake Rogers light, if you will, in terms of the hitting ability. Jake Rogers isn't known for hitting for average, but I don't think you can compare their stats in the minors. And Jake Rogers was about the same, except he hit for higher average in the minors than Dingler is. So I don't know. I mean, I think he's got a chance to be a very strong backup catcher for a long time. And the hitting is the big question for me, because it's got multiple years now of him not really making those adjustments. So I don't know if I can expect to see him do that in AAA and the majors.
Dingler's got a lot of skills, and I think I tweeted something this week where really, really great catchers, they either are great really young, say 22 or less, or it's pretty common that catchers don't really mature to 27 or 28. And I'm kind of hoping that Dingler is in that last class, because he for sure has the athleticism and the skill makeup. It's just a matter of refining it and getting a little more consistent. All right, boys, please share, each of you, where they can find you on YouTube and Twitter, and where they can find Tiger Minor League Report and the pod.
So you can find us on YouTube at Tigers Minor League Report, and on Twitter at Tigers ML Report. You can also find our pods. You can find the Tiger Minor League Report on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And we also have the Motor City Metrics podcast, which is Chris and I have been on doing a show now since 2016, and different variation names, of course. And you can find that at Motor City Metrics. And we also have MCM Baseball Pod on Twitter. And we also have a GoFundMe too that we'll be happy to share the link. We're trying to get some extra funds because we do this a lot of love, but we also want to make sure that we're providing as much content out there. So if you can donate a few bucks to help us out, that'd be greatly appreciated. And there's a page that's a part of a GoFundMe link, so we can share the link. And we also have a Patreon too that I admittedly been slacking a little bit now season, putting some extra content out there, but that's also at Tiger Minor League Report as well.
Where are we finding you, Chris?
Yeah, Chris Brown 0914 on Twitter, but I don't tweet that much. Just go to the other stuff.
All right, boys. You know how much I love you. It's been an honor to have you on. I'm sure we'll have you on again during the season, and pay attention to your YouTube page once the year starts. I know Roger's going to try to go down for some spring training. I appreciate you taking some time tonight. We'll catch you down the road. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot to the Tiger Minor League Report guys. We'll be back in a minute. So that was a lot of fun. Covered a lot of players. Hopefully plugged into quite a few of the Tiger minor leaguers. Didn't even really cover where both Baseball America and BP are ranking these players. Jackson Jobe, number 2 pitcher in all of the prospects lists after Paul Skeens this year. So very well thought of in both lists. Colt Keith in the top 25 in both. So pretty exciting stuff, Tiger minor leaguers. Those boys do a great job. So let's touch real quickly before we get out of here. Casey Mize resolved his arbitration dispute. You and I got a slight laugh out of that. It really didn't need to go that far, and it was kind of a reflection of maybe some better more diplomatic thinking on both parties' parts to resolve it. Share with me what your thoughts are. I know you have a thought about the option part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the club option is getting picked up. That's just my take on it. But basically, the Tigers and Casey Mize avoided arbitration hearing by agreeing to a 1-year, $830K contract for the 2024 season that includes a club option for the 2025 season. The club option is worth $3.1 million. The question is going to be, hey, look, is Casey Mize even going to be able to, pitch enough innings to get up to $3.1 million in ARB next year? So basically what happens is the Tigers are going to either A, pick up the club option and pay Casey Mize $3.1 million, or they decline the club option. Casey Mize gets a $10K buyout, and then he remains arbitration eligible. So he just goes through the arbitration cycle once again. So he's guaranteed to get $840K. But again, the Tigers could pick up the $3.1 million club option. The question is, are they going to do it? I'm not so certain that's going to happen. This is a guy who's, hasn't been healthy and hasn't pitched for the Tigers since April of 2022. He's coming back from elbow surgery and back surgery. And is he even going to be able to get beyond 150 innings? I think is a really fair question to ask. So if he doesn't get up past 150 innings, and if those 150 innings aren't like elite dominant, I don't know if he's even going to get, $3.1 million, through the ARB process anyway. So I would expect them to decline the option at that point. But by offering the club option, it allows the Tigers to keep intact their status as a file and trial club under Scott Harris. File and trial strategy basically means the Tigers won't have further discussions about a 1-year contract if the club and the player don't come to an agreement by the deadline to exchange salary figures. So the Tigers and Casey Mize, they couldn't agree. There weren't going to be any more contract discussions about a strict 1-year deal. So they basically made it, it's a potential 2-year deal, I guess, but it's really just a 1-year deal with a club option on there. So we'll see what happens with it. I'm happy it's over. It's probably good for both sides. I'm excited to get to spring training and talk to Casey Mize about baseball and baseball only.
Well, somebody smart enough to tell the powers that be to make this go away because it was a terrible look, and I'm glad they addressed it quickly. That's all I have to say about it. You did an interesting article, I think yesterday, if not today, about a kid who the Tigers are very, very, very connected to in the international market for 2025. Had a chance to watch some videos of him swinging. Looked like Julio Rodriguez really had some bat speed. Not a small guy either, but super athletic looking. Why don't you tell us about him?
Yeah, so just to clarify, the story has nothing to do with Chris Rodriguez, but within the story, there is a little bit about Chris Rodriguez. I mean, the story obviously goes into detail about, the Tigers and their, results in the international market, which haven't been great. But then, you hear about this Chris Rodriguez kid. I did some digging. I found out kind of what the, signing bonus is looking like. It's going to be over $3 million. It sounds like he's going to be, potentially a top 3 player in the 2025 class, among all international players. Definitely is going to be top 10. Maybe top 5. And I'm told, hey, watch out. Like this guy could be top 3. When I first saw him, I said, Julio Rodriguez, that name clicked for me. Mark, when you saw the video that I tweeted out for the first time, you said it looks like a righty Riley Green with that swing. Those were our first 2 evaluations. Other people have talked about, this looks like an A-Rod. Some people have said, it looks like this big name, that big name. But there's reason to get excited because he looks really good. He's a 15-year-old right now from the Dominican Republic. Tigers are expected to sign him for north of a $3 million bonus in January 2025. I heard that from a couple different sources, so I feel pretty good about that. Can't officially sign, but there's an agreement in place. He's 6'3". I saw a photo of him standing next to Nomar Mazara. Nomar Mazara is 6'4", which confirms that this kid is definitely 6'3". And yeah, the swing is sweet from the right side. Like I'm very excited to learn a little bit more about him as time goes on. He turns 16 soon. So again, it's all super early and it's kind of throwing darts at the wall. But when you see the swing, and Mark, you saw it too. I tweeted the video. It's out there on my Twitter account. I mean, that's a swing. That's a baseball swing.
It was tasty. It was a sweet looking swing. All right. It's been a hell of a week. I cannot believe the Lions are going to the NFC title game. We've had a lot of fun. A lot of info on the pods. You can figure out where you can watch a baseball game this summer. You can listen to who's going to be a good prospect. I'd like to thank our executive producer, Kirk Crawford and Anjanette Delgado. I'd like to thank the Free Press editor, Nicole Avery Nichols, our producer, as always, who cleans up our mess every single week.
He's so good.
Robin Chan, my grandson Braden Michael Gorash, for my partner Evan Petzold. I say peace.